Why not just put your property in a trust as a first lien holder before anything is done, and have their certificate of affirmation, one way or the other, affirm and say that you and your trust are the first lien holder? Why stand out when you can simply use the basic element of art of war by merging with your terrain? If you've ever went out hunting, you know that deers with certain skin tones are the first ones to get it. When you go out hunting in any other aspect, you realize that color spectrums play a huge role. So much that the hunter themselves merges themselves in the environment by wearing camouflage. Same applies with formal battles and wars. These are common sense that humans transfer into other aspects of life. Just because you're dealing with pen and paper does not mean that does not apply. Stop making yourself a victim. No one else can make you a victim unless you first identify as such by either lack of information or misinformation or deliberate use of what does not benefit you, independent of the first two. But the worst of all three is misinformation, because misinformation would have you thinking you have it figured out. Misinformation will have you thinking you're walking in the right path when you really aren't. Freedom is far, far more valuable from one to waste another extremely valuable attribute in reality called time, dabbling in falsehood with the intent of getting to that falsehood. In other words, if you require water, light, and the proper soil temperature for a particular plant to grow, in this case, the plant you desire to grow or your desired outcome is your freedom. But what you are doing is you're lighting the match, you're taking a flammable liquid substance, a fluid lighter, kerosene, gasoline, whatever it is, you're pouring it in the soil, substituting that flammable matter for water. And then you're taking that flame from that match and substituting it for sunlight. Sure, there's some similitude in those two things. The flammable liquid is liquid. So is the water required for the plant to grow. The heat emitted by the match and the fire created by the match has some form of light in it, no different than sunlight that's required for the plant to grow. But the issue is that what is required is nonetheless not being used for you to get your desired outcome. The same apply with the concept of freedom that many people deal with. In several videos, you would have heard me make reference to those who cite case laws and create spurious quotes from those case laws, which misleads people because, for one, those quotes never exist within the case laws, and two, the majority of people reading those quotes never actually go to the case itself and read the decisions and what is applicable and what is not. I'm going to show you how people are misled and people jump on the bandwagon and repeat something that begins with posts as simple as this. The only reason why a lie that is repeated ever so often becomes a truth is because the origin of that lie can never be traced. Therefore, people just casually pass it on to say, do this or don't do it, without knowing the why, the how, or how it even came to life. Therefore, people just blindly accept it. Here's a Facebook group. I'm going to redact the name and the group itself because the point here is not for the purpose of deterring people or advertising that people go on these pages. The point, though, is the misinformation that is misleading both young and old in chronological age and an introduction to information like this. Believe it or not, small misinformation like these is what leads people to carry a state of mind for 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 years. And they don't even know the fact that what they found has no factual basis to it. Meanwhile, within those time period before people come to the beginning stages after spending 7, 5, 8 years of dabbling in fuckery, The tortfeasors are getting wealthier, more comfortable, more happy, and they're perfecting their system of tort. Who knows, maybe the ones that come in these social media groups where they know that people are deliberately seeking some type of clarity for the purpose of freedom, one way or the other. Who knows, maybe the people who introduce these type of information are part of arm's length tools to be used for misinformation. It's about time that is dismantled so that you, the one who joined these groups, could be more prudent about where you take your source of information from. Sure, no one is perfect. No one is perfect. Because if such perfection exists in those that exist in this earth, we'll live in a perfect world. But the rooms for error that exists is what allows us to nonetheless grow, which is what most people seek towards freedom. Freedom does not exist if you don't grow out of your current level of awareness and current comfort zone. This is part of it. Here goes this post. Supreme Court case law. John Dalan versus State. Right to travel. We're not here to say right to travel is right or wrong. We went over the details as to the misconceptions and what's applicable and what's not. Regardless of whether it be reviewed or with bias, it's none of my business. The least you can't say is the information is not provided to you. Nonetheless, a particular post that further misleads people is right to travel. And again, as caveats are introduced in other videos, if you carry some type of state of mind of making fun of someone or smearing insults or being tunnel vision to say this is the only thing that exists, you can just do yourself a favor and remove yourself from this video. Makes the world easier for you, makes the world easier for everyone else. And if complicating things through feud and convoluting things through a fixed state of mind is what any given observer of this specific content is interested in, then nonetheless, knock yourself out. It really won't get too far. Because where the objective truth sits and where there are those truly seeking information for the purpose of clarity, so that their lives will become one step at a time, become clearer about the invisible strings called pen and paper, legal things, lawful things that affects everyone's life. So long as there are those seeking those objective, substantive truth, even if it's 1 out of every 100, then that is all that matters. Because that one man or woman out of 100 that found what they were seeking for, or were provided clarity, which prevented them from missing the proper path they're supposed to take, is part of a greater chain of events that makes a greater difference at large. One mind at a time. Here is now the misleading post in this social media group. Supreme Court case law, John Dalan versus State. Right to travel. Quote, no license or plates needed to travel, unquote. In other words, they're saying that this res judicata says this, quote unquote. And then they transition to say, in their own words, in private, all right? And from now on, if you get pulled, don't argue. It's more credit for you. A false sense of confidence is provided after this quote that you don't need one thing or the other, which we're not saying you do or you don't, but they're quoting it from this specific res judicata. Now people are going in thinking this res judicata says this exact same thing. So we're going to pull up this exact res judicata and the appellate decision, and most importantly, a caveat involved in that appellate decision, besides the fact that this quote itself never even existed within this case law at all. After this misleading information within the first few words, they now go into some emotional rhetoric and start throwing buzzwords that people are readily familiar with to somehow merge the assumption of truth with a sense of entitlement and other naturally existing proper term that is inapplicable to the totality of the message being conveyed, which eventually misleads people. The post goes on to say, they're banking on you not knowing your rights, the emotion simulations. to be under private trust, the buzzwords people know about, and not under their jurisdiction to be, quote, robbed of NIs or securities, the buzzword most people chase after. If people really knew the reality of how securities work and how they really get their hands on it, they'll realize that it's more work than most people just casually throw about in these social media. They'll realize that it's mostly based on relationships. They'll realize that their relationship will not exist if you're not competent. They will realize that most of the activities they engage in daily actually prevents them from even coming close to getting here. But let's put that aside. And then all the sense of entitlement of being robbed. Not a problem. We're not contending this does not occur. But why mislead people is the question. Then they're going to UCC 1, Form 3949, 211 copy. Now they're allegedly providing the solution. But let's go back to this case law before any of this even comes into the equation to be considered as being valid. John Dalan versus State, right to travel. Here is the res judicata. The first few things you will see is this. At the top of the appellate decision, it tells you this opinion has no precedential value. Precedents are the citation of case laws to say, hey, it exists and thus it can be applied at society at large based on the specific applicable circumstance. And you can even use it in other proceedings. That's what precedents are. You can cite them to back your cases up. Yet, were you aware that some decisions are not precedential? Meaning, you cannot cite them to have any value for it to be used to back up whatever you're saying. That's where this post fails first. Because they cite it as though it has a precedential value where it actually doesn't. This is where the subtle substance of things are. Just because it's a case law does not mean you can cite it. This is another reason why I tell people, you citing a bunch of case laws does not validate your case, does not make your case stronger. One reason why on that end. And also the first reason why the citation of this in this group is dead from the start. And many people are being misled. The actual document and decision goes on to say it should not be cited or relied on as precedent in any proceeding, except as provided by Rule 268 D2 SCACR, which is South Carolina Appellate Court Rule. So now you're looking at the Courts of Appeal of South Carolina. The way this was presented is as though it is United States Supreme Court. United States Supreme Court cases applies to all 50 states because the United States is basically a treaty of each so-and-so states coming together. Therefore, the United States Supreme Court is applicable based on full faith in all other state of so-and-so. But this case law only exists at South Carolina. And even at South Carolina, it was made succinct. The first few words on the face of the decision of the document, which made the final determination of everything, told you this thing cannot be cited as a precedent. Now you might say, well, maybe it's because there's something that favors everyday man and woman. Nope, not really. We'll get to that. But then there's an exception as to, well, where can you cite it? It's in the South Carolina Appellate Court rules. South Carolina Judicial Branch, Rule 268, Citation of South Carolina Authority. What we're looking for is 268 D2. Appellate Court Decision. 2. Memorandum opinions and unpublished orders have no precedential value, meaning they cannot be cited to back up whatever you're saying the subject matter is pertaining to. And should not be cited, and should not be cited, and should not be cited, except in proceedings, which is this exceptions here, meaning they cannot be cited except as provided by this rule. Said rule is this, and that exception is provided as follows. It should not be cited except in proceedings in which they are directly involved. In other words, all the chain of events that led to this appeal, and if this appeal on the South Carolina level was to go to the United States level, then they will cite this. Not that other cases will cite this particular case. That's what this exception shows. Memorandum opinions may be cited in the following form. And if you are to cite it from this exception, here's the format of how you cite it. We've made a separate video on how to cite case laws. This video. It's on Patreon. Unpublished orders may be cited in a similar manner, this format, as provided for published order under 268D1. So we've learned two things so far. One, this res judicata mentioned in that Facebook group is not applicable to all jurisdictions, but South Carolina only. And two, even at South Carolina, it is only for the purpose of this case itself and a chain of events involved in this case if it was to be moved up or reverse or remand. And you see what the final outcome is. By the way, reversal or remand is just basically returning it to trial stage for a few different reasons. Affirming is just saying that, yep, the trial stage was right, you the one appealing is wrong. That's the summary of it. In the state of South Carolina, in the Court of Appeal, John Dalan, appellant versus the state. Respondent, appellate case number 2018-000637. Appeal from, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, so I don't want to butcher it, County, R. Lawton McIntosh, certain court, judge. Unpublished opinion number 2020-UP-323. Submitted November 1st, 2020, filed December 2nd, 2020. Affirmed. Meaning whatever was said at the trial court was affirmed, and whoever appealed, oh well. Now let us take this exact quote. These are not the quotes that I'm asserting. These are the quotes from this post. They put an exact quote. No license or plate needed to travel. Now let's simply copy that and paste that in the search function. It is nowhere to be found. And this is just a simple 5-page document. Nowhere to be found. You can look this document up yourself. No search phrase, words, sets of words that might seem favorable as it's been presented in this post exists in this res judicata that they are making reference to. John Dalan versus state. John Dalan versus state. It does not exist. In fact, they affirmed the opposite of what this man or woman is asserting as the reason why they can go into all these other rhetoric that misleads people with buzzwords. And what was the purpose of the appeal being brought? Dalan argues, 1, the magistrate erred in proceeding with trial after he challenged the court's jurisdiction. 2, the magistrate and circuit court erred ignoring his constitutional challenge to South Carolina, whatever it was. I assume this is what he or she was charged with. 3, the proceeding before the magistrate and circuit court violated his due process. And 4, the magistrate and circuit court violated First Amendment right. We affirm. We affirm means whatever they said is correct, and he was wrong. These are the lingos of appellate jurisdiction. The magistrate court did not err in proceeding with trial because it has subject matter jurisdiction, and then they went on into all the other things. Second, the magistrate court had personal jurisdiction over Dalan because Dalan's uniform traffic ticket stated the violation occurred in so-and-so county, and the magistrate court conducted trial in the same county. They are saying the complete opposite of what this man or woman is saying here, that no license or plate needed to travel. They're saying, well, the magistrate was correct and John Dalan was wrong. They did have jurisdiction. Third, a uniform traffic ticket is a proper charging instrument. Dalan ticket was supported by a probable cause. They then cited a bunch of other stuff. 2, the magistrate court did not ignore defendant's challenge to the constitutionality of section blah, blah, blah. 3, Dalan's due process right was not violated by the state failure to allege and prove he was engaged in transportation, which is what most people speak of. It's so embarrassing that I don't even want to speak about this. Most people say they're not for hire, and then they register their stuff with the Department of Transportation. This is the same thing this guy was saying. and he brought it all the way to appeal. This is the same thing this guy was saying. And they're saying he's wrong, but the circuit court was right. Dalan due process rights were not violated by the state failure to allege and prove he was engaged in transportation because section so-and-so blah blah blah. Section 56-1-20 only requires the state to prove a person drove a motor vehicle. They're not even speaking about travel. In fact, they're affirming that he was quote unquote driving motor vehicle, which most people who relate to right to travel say they're not doing. Again, we're not saying one thing is right or wrong. But what has been said here is be very prudent as to who you take reference from. Now, what part of this case law refers to traveling? Here are every instance that the word travel is used in this case. The first instance was in the third page towards the middle. Rather, the state has the authority under its police powers, which we went over in this video when it comes to police power, as attached to traveling. Rather, the state has authority under its police power to regulate drivers in the interest of public safety and welfare, and this regulation does not impede the right to travel. Most people assume that traveling is separate from driving, which it is, because you can move from point A to point B. But the moment that any type of machinery is involved on public road, where public trust doctrine is involved, and some of the interest of creation of that machine and creation of that road, aka usufruct, is involved in public trust, then it is deemed as driving. The way traveling is determined is moving from one point to the other. When traveling is done using machinery on public roads, it's considered driving. Sure, they can be different, driving and traveling, that is, but nonetheless, they are intertwined. Instead of you worrying about the wrong words that someone have intellectually masturbated into your head and squirted all the juice in you, and you're licking it and gobbling it up, and you're trying to regurgitate it, what you ought to do is learn how trust and contract law works so that none of that would ever matter. They can miss you with that. Go on with your life and seek your pursuit of happiness without being stuck in the dark ages, while affirming the position of someone who's mentally ill, who has an organized system, who want you to be a victim, and you just keep playing the victim. So now you're just codependent with the one torturing you socioeconomically, torturing you based on power struggle. Why? There's a right way to do something and there's a wrong way to do it. The quickest way to do something wrong is to jump on the bandwagon. Think for yourself. Believe it or not, this post made 8 hours ago on this page goes a long way in people's life. It will stay with some people for years after years after years. People's lives are being destroyed out here due to misinformation like this. Why? When the solution easily exists, and you can abate yourself and exempt yourself from fuckeries like these. I'm certain they know what their intent is as they're doing this. It's not being insinuated that whoever posted this is doing this in bad faith or good faith. Whatever cause they have, maybe they're just bored. Maybe they are agent provocateurs. Maybe they're not. Maybe they really think they got it figured out because they probably received it from someone who gave it to them just like this. Maybe they read some PDF and they just copied and pasted it. This is also one of those groups where they just post a bunch of PDFs and people don't use deductive and inductive reasoning, basic standards of thinking, to question themselves first before they just run away with it. Life, time, and freedom are far, far too valuable than to squander it on what is the mere semblance and the feel good of the real thing. Again, going back to the example, you're taking a lighter fluid, pretending it's water. You're taking matches adding it to that lighter fluid that you put into the soil, pretending it's sunlight. Stop playing pretend. Deal with reality. The same amount of effort people take in dealing with these information that misleads them, it's the same amount of energy that it takes to do the right thing, learn the right thing. It has zero to do with what you think who's in control or not. It has everything to do with competency. You can only be right when you are competent. And even if you're not completely competent, so long as you're not just going based on misinformation, someone who is wrong will not see an open door and opportunity for them to keep doing what is wrong towards you. Because they know that even you, the one who say you ought to be free from their tort, are also wrong. Nuance and small things like this is what misleads people. Someone is probably in their lunch break. They open this Facebook group, they read it. In their mind, they have a fuel of fire in them thinking they figured one more thing out. When in truth, they're one step away, not closer to their freedom that they desire. Quote, freedom to travel throughout the United States has long been recognized as a basic right under the Constitution, unquote. What this case law is telling you, you have the right to travel all you want, but it's still subject to police power because of public trust doctrine we went over in these videos. That's the first instance that freedom to travel is mentioned. And that's the exact quote, and that's the exact res judicata involved. Not these terminologies of, quote, no license or plate needed to travel, unquote. The second instance in which the word travel is even used within this case law is as follows. Quote, a state law implicates the right to travel when it actually deters such travel, meaning right to travel is subject to regulation. Then goes on to say, when impeding travel is its primary objective, it being the state law which regulates the travel. When impeding travel, for the purpose of regulation, is its primary objective, or when it uses any classification which services to penalize the exercise of that right. Meaning, if someone has a warrant or someone is putting someone else's life in danger one way or the other, then, well, you can be penalized and that right to travel can be subject to regulation. Or if you're involved with more than yourself outside of your own private property, sure, that vehicle can be your private property, no doubt about it. But that private property is now being used intertwined with other people, whereby it could affect others one way or the other. That's a state of mind being used and viewed through public trust doctrine. Therefore, it is subject to regulation. That's totality of the circumstance that you need to see, rather than putting yourself in a box, in a tunnel vision. It's not being said here that you're wrong and someone else is right, or that someone else is wrong or you're right. Just see the objective reality. Then ask yourself what is the proper way, rather than being misled by false quotes on social media. That's the second and third instance that the word travel are used in this case law. The fourth instance is as follows. Quote, it makes reference to a case law, held that burdens on a single mode of transportation did not implicate the right to interstate travel, and finding that Miller did not have fundamental right to travel. Meaning the burden of regulating one man's ability to travel for one reason or the other is viewed and weighed compared to a larger circumstance, which is the other people using that same road. They're saying since they're engaging in public trust doctrine, the purpose of public safety, well, it has to be regulated. Why not just put your property in a trust as a first lien holder before anything is done, and have their certificate of affirmation one way or the other affirm and say that you and your trust are the first lien holder? Why stand out when you can simply use the basic element of art of war by merging with your terrain? If you've ever went out hunting, you know that deers with certain skin tones are the first ones to get it. When you go out hunting in any other aspect, you realize that color spectrums play a huge role. So much that the hunter themselves merges themselves with the environment by wearing camouflage. Same applies with formal battles and wars. These are common sense that humans transfer into other aspects of life. Just because you're dealing with pen and paper does not mean that does not apply. Stop making yourself a victim. No one else can make you a victim unless you first identify as such by either lack of information or misinformation or deliberate use of what does not benefit you, independent of the first two. But the worst of all three is misinformation, because misinformation would have you thinking you have it figured out. Misinformation will have you thinking you're walking on the right path when you really aren't. Social media is the source that most people get the information that is keeping them stagnant. And then buzzwords like securities and things are thrown around like private trust and things about being robbed and a bunch of forms. These forms don't even apply the way that it's being explained here. But to a newbie or someone who might have heard of something relating to this, all this sounds so attractive. It's like that dude, woo, 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 talking all that good stuff, doing the maiden dance in front of a female. Later on down the line, she gets her ass whooped. The copulation is not as good as she thought it would be. Life is not as sweet as all that maiden dance and all that maiden call, that woo, woo, woo with her. That's how people end up figuring out that these things they're finding on social media is. This right here is all a bunch of woo, woo, woo talk. No different than a maiden call. This is not even marketing. This is not even sales. This is just some straight BS. There's nothing wrong with marketing what you have to say. There's nothing wrong with having sales skills and learning how to speak to people in a way that you can transfer the information in your mind to them with the least amount of information lost in transition. But at least you're certain that it's not misleading people. Because the core of things relating to this is people's lives. Years, time. It's now up to you to use your discernment. After this caveat in this video, it's been alluded to in several videos that case laws are referred to in social medias, and if you read it, you realize that it's really not there, so and so. It was mentioned 2 years ago. And the proof of the truth from 2 years ago still is going on today. This was 8 hours ago. And chances are this will keep happening because this is not new. Think. Freedom is not something that can just be handed to you like this. You thinking you're obtaining something that's the original thing, but you're just getting some BS on the side. Time is far too valuable. Freedom is far too precious for it to be used on misinformation, or for you to allow misinformation to use you. Don't allow information to enslave you. Information should free you. Be very prudent with these social media groups. Till next time, take care. Best of luck.